Welcome to the Developers Who Test podcast, a podcast for developers who embrace test automation so they can ship better quality software faster and have more fun doing it. In today's episode, we're talking about DORA and the new DORA AI capabilities model, and you're going to want to stick around for this one. I'm your host, Chris Harbert, and I'm here today with Nathen Harvey. Nathen leads the DORA team at Google Cloud. And as a thought leader in our industry, he's co-authored multiple reports on software delivery performance and was a contributor and editor for 97 Things Every Cloud Engineer Should Know. Welcome to Developers Who Test, Nathen.
Hey, thanks so much, Chris. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk about DORA. It's a topic that we've talked about before, and I think a lot of people are, they're familiar with at this point the four key metrics of DORA. But I kind of wanted to dig a little more into, some of maybe the misconceptions or misapplications of DORA that you've seen, given that you're so closely involved with that. So I guess for starters, what do you think people get right about DORA, and what do you think people get wrong about DORA?
Well, it's maybe easier and more fun to start with the things that people get wrong about DORA. So let's start there. I think I think first and foremost, the biggest thing that people get wrong is probably the thing that DORA is most well known for. In fact, you just mentioned it there in your intro, the four keys, the four software delivery performance metrics. And it's not necessarily that people get them wrong so much as that I've seen a lot of sort of anti-patterns when it comes to application of those metrics. And I'll just list off a couple of them. The first and probably biggest one is people look at DORA, they find those four measures, and they're like, great, I know everything I need to know about DORA. And more importantly than that, I know everything I need to know about software delivery performance. As long as I'm
Mm.
measuring these four things like that's all I need to do. And the reality is that is like you've just barely scratched the surface. I almost oftentimes equate it to like, I don't know, let's say, Chris, you wanted to get healthier. I don't know. I've been on this journey a couple of times across my life. I look at myself and I say, I wish that the shape of my body was a little bit different. So the first thing I do is I get on the scale in the morning. And the scale gives me some numbers. Those numbers are like those four measures of software delivery
Mm.
performance. Here's how you're doing. Well, I don't change those numbers by getting on the scale the next day and the day after that and the day after that. Uh, I have to do other things. I maybe have to change my eating habits, maybe have to change my exercise habits, my sleep habits. Like there are a lot of things that I can do to change those habits that will impact that number that I see on the scale. The same is true with software delivery performance. And this is where DORA, over the past decade plus, DORA's been around for, I don't know, depends on how you measure, 12 to 14 years now,
Mm.
it feels like. But in any case, like, what are the things, and in DORA we typically call them capabilities, maybe capabilities or practices, conditions that you and your team and your organization need to have in place and exercise regularly in order to improve those software delivery performance metrics.
Mm.
And it's really focusing on those that really matters. We're going to change something like, I don't know, maybe we have poor test automation. If we increase and improve our test automation, we can then shrink down the amount of time it takes to get a change into production. We can deploy
Mm.
with confidence because we've got fast feedback and good signals that tell us that this change is ready to go. And so it is really kind of looking beyond those four measures, which, by the way, for the last couple of years, it's turned into five measures, but read the reports to get all the details on that.
Yeah, I really appreciate you mentioning that. So now, was the Accelerate book what kind of introduced DORA and initially put it out there, or was it out there before that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the research program itself, like I said, it's been going for I don't know. I think it's something like 13 years now, maybe 14. But it started out of a company called Puppet. Well, it was called Puppet Labs at the time. They ran a state of DevOps survey and then published a state of DevOps report. Shortly after that, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, joined the team that was responsible for doing this. And she helped with the research effort for a couple of years. And then she and Jez Humble and Gene Kim wrote the book Accelerate. And
Mm.
Accelerate was really kind of a summary of the first 3 to 5 years, somewhere in that range, of the research that had happened up until that point. So in many ways, Accelerate was the introduction of DORA to a lot of people. That's the first
Mhm.
time they really interacted with it. But the research had been going for quite some time. Now, one of the challenges of Accelerate goes right back to what we just talked about. I think it's on page 19 that the 4 software delivery metrics are introduced. People get that far and they're like, all right, I got it. I don't need to read the rest of the book. The value, of course, in the book is everything that comes after that. And specifically, the Appendix A has a nice model, the
Mm.
capabilities model, that kind of shows how all of these capabilities connect to those outcomes. And that kind of becomes the capability map, if you will, on what you and your team need to focus on when it comes to improving those software delivery performance metrics.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think something that some of our listeners might not realize is just how groundbreaking it was to have research into software development practices at all.
Yeah.
So, you know, I kind of got my career started around the time extreme programming was just
Mhm.
becoming a thing. Agile was just becoming a thing. And we all knew that the waterfall model wasn't the best way to develop software. People at the time had been on 2 to 4 year long projects before code even got written, and then
Yes.
everything got canceled. Your company might not even have a team anymore before you ship to production. So we were failing miserably at most of our software delivery projects. And when Agile came out, it was groundbreaking because with Agile and extreme programming, software projects were by and large obviously much more successful than what we had been doing, but it was so much based on just feeling and experience. There wasn't any data to back it up. So I think that was one of the groundbreaking things of this research was now we've actually studied companies that are successful and companies that aren't successful.
Yes.
uh,
Yeah.
to what extent though do you think it's correlation versus causation, and like how do you tell those two things apart?
Yeah, I think that kind of gets into some of the fundamental questions of research in general. But I do think that what we see, like because we kind of have two things working in our favor. One, each year we're able to collect data from thousands of different people. In 2025 alone, we had about 5,000 respondents to our global annual survey. These respondents come from organizations of every shape and size. So, with that amount of data and the questions that we ask, we're really able to do a lot of statistically valid investigation into those patterns and find the practices that are actually correlating and in fact causing better software delivery performance. Now, the reality is that when it comes to software delivery performance or the dynamics of a team or an organization, obviously it's super complex. We cannot account for every single variable, but we can see enough in the data to draw these conclusions, to show with evidence that shipping in smaller batches leads to better software delivery performance, that getting faster feedback on the changes that you're making leads to better software delivery performance. And speaking of groundbreaking, I mean, why software delivery performance is sort of the center of gravity of DORA. I think for two big reasons. One, as you mentioned, there were and frankly still are so many teams that spend a lot of time thinking about designing and even building software who have real challenges when it comes time to delivering that software to users. And of
Mhm.
course, the software that we write has provides no value to anyone until a user can interact with it, right? And
Mhm.
so that delivery process is so oftentimes so full of friction that we really as organizations want to improve that. Part two of that is, when we think about software delivery performance, we measure throughput. So how many changes and how quickly can you move changes through the system? But we have to counter that with measures of stability. So when I push a change to production, how likely is it to stick? How, or maybe the inverse question, how likely am I to roll that change back or to
Mhm.
have to push forward a hot fix immediately following that? And the reality is, when this research started, there were many across the industry who felt you could have one or the other. You can have throughput, high levels of throughput, or high levels of stability.
Mhm.
But what the research has borne out for over a decade now, every single year, year in and year out. These two don't move in opposition to one another, they move together. So the teams that have the highest levels of throughput also have the highest levels of stability. And the teams that move slowest are most likely to roll back changes when they push them through to production. So going back to your, comments around waterfall, if it takes me 6 months to build up a collection of features, a collection of changes that I want to ship off to production, I can almost guarantee that since it's been probably 6 months since the last time you pushed change to production, that push is going to go poorly. And something in that collection of 6 months worth of changes that you've built up is going to go off to the point where you're probably going to roll that change back or have to push forward a hotfix. So you're dealing with that instability almost every time you deliver.
Yeah, have there been any of the practices where the research has surprised you of, something you thought was a bad practice, but the data says, "Oh, actually that's the right way to do it."
I think probably the most surprising for a lot of people, and maybe the most controversial for most people, is the idea of trunk-based development.
Mm,
And trunk-based development gets, it can really bring out the heckles in a lot of people. Either it's of course a thing that we should do, or it's completely impractical and there's no way that we could do it within my organization. The reality is, though, that trunk-based development, well, first, just like everything else, the label has different meanings to a lot of different people. So the way that we've sort of assessed trunk-based development over the years is that we ask, as I said, survey questions. So everyone on your team, any developer, is checking in code to the main line at least on a daily basis. You have very short-lived branches, if you have branches at all. These are sort of some of the characteristics of trunk-based development.
mhm,
And what we find, of course, is that smaller changes are better, right? They're easier to reason about, they're easier to integrate, and integrating them gives us faster feedback. All of these things are really important. Interestingly, though, over the years, because we ask similar questions across the years, one of the things that we found a few years back was that trunk-based development and burnout for people on the team were also somewhat related.
mm.
And we can't, the data can't really tell us how. This was definitely a controversial finding, though. We had lots of people coming out of the woodwork saying, no, there's no way that trunk-based development can cause burnout. But when we dig deeper, and when we have, and we did this in 2025 as well, we have qualitative interviews. So we do sort of mixed methods in our research. So we sit down, we had over 100 hours of qualitative data in 2025. But we also have the DORA community where we get together and we talk about the findings. And one of the things that we did in the DORA community was we had a discussion around trunk-based development. And you did have people that have been doing trunk-based development for years, really not understanding how could this possibly cause burnout. But then you had other people in that conversation who their team was brand new to trunk-based development, and they were trying to introduce those practices on their teams. And it became very obvious how it might contribute to burnout. There were people on the team that were working in an environment where they were really afraid of taking risks, of failing, of
Mm,
looking like they did something wrong. And they knew that trunk-based development, having to merge their code very frequently, could expose them to some of that risk.
mm.
Now, maybe that speaks to a larger cultural and organizational challenge. Like maybe we've set up the right conditions for burnout to happen, and introducing trunk-based development at the same time kind of exacerbates that. That's certainly likely. But I think it's really interesting just to think about the complexities of these teams and organizations that we're working in and how all of these things sort of interrelate to one another.
Today's episode of the Developers Who Test podcast is brought to you by Testery. Did you know that most companies that run end-to-end tests are underutilizing their testing infrastructure, and that this waste results in slower, more expensive test runs? Testery automatically optimizes your test runs so you get results 2 to 8 times faster. The best part is you don't need to switch testing frameworks or CI/CD platforms in order to get results. To find out just how much faster your test runs could be, visit testery.com today. Yeah, one of the things I've seen just through doing consulting work and years of shipping software and everything
Absolutely.
is you have to have alignment on these practices. And like people think you can introduce one
Yeah,
practice at a time, and really you can't. So like you can't do trunk-based development if you don't also talk about test data management, if you don't
that,
also talk about test
that's right.
automation, CI/CD pipelines, because they're all so interrelated. And so what I see sometimes is like, we go to trunk-based development, we ship everything to production, but we didn't figure out the testing part. So now we're just shipping defects
Yes,
faster, and
yes.
our releases are a disaster. And so I do think that's important for alignment. Do you think, and maybe this kind of segues into the AI capabilities model? Do you think these models help tell us how to get that right
I think
alignment
the models
across
can be
all
a
of the different
tool
things
in
that we're
helping
trying
you
to do?
achieve that alignment. Oftentimes, what I'll do with a team on Dora.dev, which is the website where you can find all of the Dora information, we have what we call the Dora core model. And this is the set of capabilities that we've investigated multiple times over the years. So we have really good confidence that these particular capabilities drive better performance. What I will often do with a team is pull together a team and have a poster sized version of the Dora capabilities model and pass out to team members green, yellow, and red like sticky dots and say, all right, look at this capabilities model on the left hand side where you have all of those capabilities. Go put a green dot on the things that you think your team is really good at, a red dot on the things where you think you need to improve, and a yellow dot where maybe you're curious or not sure exactly what that thing means. And inevitably, what happens is you start to see clusters of red that can really help a team both have this aha moment like, oh, I thought documentation quality was bad, but I didn't think anyone else cared. But look, we've all put red dots on documentation quality as an example. Maybe this is something that as an organization, as a team, we need to get aligned around improving. And so I think that the capabilities model can help
Mhm.
with that alignment as a tool. But then to your point, it is absolutely important that we get aligned, specifically aligned around even like higher level things. Why are we building software? We're building it for users. So what do our users like? Who are the customers of our software? Who are the users? What do they want? Are we thinking about them,
Mhm.
or are we thinking about the latest technology trend that we want to implement? And won't that be fun? And that user centric focus again is one of those
Mhm.
capabilities that is just hugely powerful.
How do you handle the situation where it's, not one size fits all?
Hmm.
I see this in test automation all the time. Somebody will say, "Oh, well, this is how
Yeah.
Google tests, so this is how everybody should test." And, the different systems that we are asked to test behave differently, right? So if you have a high throughput system where all of your users are clicking on the same buttons and the cost of failure is low, then you can send a certain percentage of them down a different path. And if there's a failure, you roll it back. If you're a small B2B SaaS company creating accounting software and the CFO only runs the
Yeah.
report once a year, but that report has to work, you can't A B test that and say, "Oh, well, sorry, we broke it 6 months ago, but
Right.
good
Right.
luck when taxes are due," right? How do you address that sort of situation when you're assessing these
Yeah,
what
this
makes
is
teams
this is
productive
super
versus not
important.
productive?
And in Dora, we kind of have you know, we we really want you to take our findings and contextualize them. You have to think about them in the context of your own organization. In fact, I might argue that one of the mistakes that Dora has done over the years is when we talk about software delivery performance, we have oftentimes in the past looked at sort of benchmarking teams against their software delivery performance and publishing those benchmarks and saying, hey, here's what a low performer looks like, a medium performer, a high performer, and an elite performer look like when it comes to those software delivery performance metrics. Now, this is fine because it is, it's nice to understand sort of how do I fit relative to peers, relative to the rest of the industry. But the reality is, your goal shouldn't be to become an elite performer. The thing I remind teams all the time is I want you to become
Mm,
an elite improver, not an elite performer. It's about the improvement and this idea of building a practice of continuous improvement that matters. So you should take the findings from Dora and use them as the hypothesis for the next experiment that you're going to go run. Hey, DORA found, as an example, DORA found that test automation leads to higher confidence when we make deployments, which allows us to ship more frequently and safer. We don't have great test automation. Let's try that out. So now let's write a hypothesis. We believe that by improving our test automation, we will be able to ship with more confidence. Go prove it or prove us wrong. But you have to prove us correct or prove it wrong within your context. That's what really matters. And that also gets you back to that idea of user centricity, thinking about the
Mm.
user. What does this user need? Does this user need this report once a year, or do they need it 3 times a day? Like, that can change, exactly as you said, how you approach
Mhm.
everything about that particular capability or that particular feature that you're shipping.
Mhm. Cool. So I also want
Yeah.
to talk to you about this new model. So the DORA team has produced a new AI capabilities model. And I guess the first question to ask anytime a new model comes out is, why do we
Yeah,
need a
for
new
sure.
model? What's wrong with
A
the
super
models that
valid
we have?
question. I don't know if you've heard or not, Chris, but AI, it's here and it's changing almost everything about how software development happens. It's really a huge part of not just the conversation, but
Yeah.
actually the practices, and teams everywhere are trying to figure out, how do we get the most out of AI? Frankly, a lot of teams, for whatever reason,
Mhm.
are feeling a lot of pressure to use more AI in everything that they do. DORA has a sort of a focus around software delivery and software engineering practices. So we want to understand, how is AI changing and impacting the software development lifecycle, and how can you get the most out of it? And so we kind of had this hypothesis going into last year's research that whether or not you were using AI was probably not going to be a determinant of whether or not you were able to ship software faster and safer, whether or not you were able to be a high performing team. But what was
Mm.
probably going to be important was how you were using AI. Where in your software development lifecycle were you using AI? How was it impacting the team and so forth? And so that hypothesis turned out to be true. We found that about 90% of our survey respondents were using AI professionally. So they were using it within their software development lifecycle. But across our sample set, across all of the people that we talked to, we were able to find a huge variance in the outcomes that teams were achieving. Outcomes in terms of software performance, software delivery performance, product
Mm.
performance, team performance, burnout, friction, a number of different factors. So this led us to the question of, well, what's different about some teams than other teams? And what we found were 7 key capabilities that, when combined with AI adoption, lead to better outcomes. So these capabilities are really sort of amplifying the effects that adopting AI has on teams. And I'll just quickly rattle off the 7. And of course, I'm doing this from memory, so this is a good test for me
Mhm.
early this morning while we're recording this. The first is a clear and communicated stance. It's really important that organizationally we're clear about how, when, why, where, what AI we allow for, we discourage, we encourage. Like, we want to understand what's possible within this organization. The second two have to do with data. One is having a healthy data ecosystem, and the other is making sure that that data is accessible to AI. So a healthy data ecosystem, I mean, we've been,
Mm.
probably you've experienced this throughout your career, but we've been fighting this challenge for decades in organizations. Silos of data that are disconnected, that aren't well connected, that where if I want to find customer information, I have to go to 8 different systems to get a full view of the customer. Like, the healthier the data ecosystem is, the better off AI is to help drive those performance gains. But of course, the AI has to have access to that. Context really is king. Using just a generic model to drive some business decisions or to drive some code, it can help, but it's going to help even more when it understands your context better. So context really is king. Next up, we have
Mhm.
2 that are sort of classic capabilities, if you will: working in small batches and strong version control practices. These are things that aren't specific to
Mm.
AI. They're specific to, or they generally apply across everything that we've researched in the past. But one of the things with AI, especially if you're using AI to help you write software, you can write a much larger change or take on a much larger feature in the same amount of time that you as a human developer might have taken on a smaller feature or a smaller change. But just because the AI can write that change fast for you doesn't mean that you should start taking on big chunks of work. We find that still working in smaller batches is really important. And then same
Mm.
thing with version control. You know, the sort of safety net that version control gives you, the ability to roll back if the AI starts off down a bad path, we can roll back that change with confidence and safety. That's really important.
I'm so glad you brought up the smaller batches piece. I've heard a few people question whether or not we should go
Yeah.
back to waterfall now that we're using AI because it's all about the documentation and you just point AI at the documentation and now you have a working system. And just
Mhm.
intuitively, that didn't feel right to me because our industry has been fighting. We've
Yes.
called iterative development a few different things over the years, but we've always known that iterative
Yeah.
development was better than big batches. So you're still finding that with
We
AI,
we are still
even though
fanding that,
AI
and
can
frankly,
generate a
my
lot
my sort of my
faster.
own personal experience is that should we be getting better about specifying what we want? Absolutely. Like we've always had opportunities to improve documentation, improve the specifications that we're giving, and you're seeing things like spec driven development or context driven development where you're really focused on getting the spec right, getting the prompt right, the context right for the LLM so that it builds the right thing. But even still, it's easier for me as an individual, and frankly you get better results from the AI when I ask it to take on smaller tasks. Just because I understand or have an idea about the whole system
Mhm.
doesn't mean I should build the whole system at once. I want to get feedback on that system. The best feedback I can get is from users, so can I ship something small to a user and start collecting feedback on that? I think that those dynamics haven't changed. You know, here we are recording this February 2026. Those dynamics haven't changed yet. Will they change in the future? I don't know. But what we can
Yeah.
say definitively from our data is we haven't seen them changing yet.
Do you
I don't think
remember
I have
the
heard of the
bowling
bowling
game
game
kata?
kata.
Have you
No.
ever heard of that? So the idea of a kata, for people who don't know, is
Yes.
when you practice a coding example to try to just get better at coding. And the bowling game one, it was actually how I learned test-driven development, uh, like way back in the day. The idea is to use test-driven development to create software code that will score the game of bowling.
Yes.
So bowling has some interesting rules, like if you roll a spare, you get extra points. If you roll a strike, you get an extra points, and then there's an extra frame at the end. And so it's a really good example for practicing, how software needs to change and how you refactor as the rules are changing. So I thought,
Yeah.
let's use AI to create the bowling game kata, and actually did a presentation on this that went pretty well last year. But the first attempt I had at it, I said I'd like to do the bowling game
Uh-huh.
and test driven development. And that was like my prompt. It spit out the entire solution to the end. It said, "Oh, I understand that you're trying to score the game of bowling. We have plenty of examples where people have done
Yep.
this kata before. We're going to grab from those. Here's your final solution." And I was, first of all, I was blown away because this was me early getting used to AI and the results. But it wasn't
Hmm.
that iterative development. It was jump to the final solution. So then I did it again and I said, we're going to do test driven development, red, green refactor. I'm going to write one test at a time. You implement one test at a time. Then we'll do refactoring, but don't do anything else. And like
Yeah.
gave it very clear rules of this is how we're going to do it. And we ended up with a different result, what I thought was a better result going through it that step by step way versus the total solution, even though it had seen this example before and could grab whatever it wanted to off the internet. And I thought that was just so interesting. But like when you adapt that to a real system, just imagine if
Right.
you're saying like, oh, create a purchase path. And that's all you're telling it to do is create a purchase path. It feels like a recipe for
Yeah, and I think
disaster
it's really
for
interesting
people to do
because
that, right?
you picked a well-known, like a solved problem that had a pretty tight scope, and it built the whole thing for you. In your second example where you helped it, and together you went through it in a test-driven development process. I would argue that you probably learned more. You probably understood the code a lot better. And if let's say tomorrow we
Mhm.
introduced a new rule to the game of bowling, I bet you would have more confidence changing the second application that you built than you would the first application that you built. There is a question, of course,
Mhm.
should we be changing applications or throwing them out and starting them from fresh every time a requirement changes? I don't think we're there yet. Just to be
Mm.
like personal opinion, I don't think we're there yet. Maybe we'll get there at some point. But again, this was a well scoped, well known problem. You know what the players of bowling expect as they're playing the game, how scoring should go. But when those when those plans change or those expectations change, or when you're learning together with the customer, what do they actually need? I think that's where, again, just that iterative development and
Mm.
experiments and learning from your customers. But the thing is, because AI can generate things so much faster, maybe we can prototype 5 things, 10 things, 100 things in the time it would have taken us to prototype one thing. So maybe I can try out a bunch of new options on the front end of this process. And that's fascinating to me. And then the other thing that's really interesting is, well, if I tried out a bunch of things in the design phase, could I get feedback on a bunch of those from customers? What might that look like? And if my team has good capabilities around progressive delivery and maybe A/B testing, like you talked about earlier, can I go from A/B testing to A B C D E F G H I J K testing and really gather more feedback? Again, AI makes it
Mm.
easier for me to do that, provided I have the right infrastructure in place that allows me to ship things safely, that allows me to test things with different user populations and gather that feedback and actually act on that feedback. So I definitely see us having tremendous potential in amping up the speed with which we experiment, the number of experiments that we're running on a regular basis. It's super, super important. Which also, Chris, I don't mean to cut us off here, but we have 2 more capabilities of the 7. So one of the capabilities is this idea of user
Yeah.
centricity. So this whole idea around experimenting and like trying things out, that's helping us get closer to the user and learn what's going to provide the most value for the user, and then hopefully the most value to us as a team, as a business, as an organization. So that becomes really important. And then finally, when we talk about things like progressive delivery and being able to build very, very fast, do you trust that the code that you built very fast is production ready? The last capability is having a high quality internal platform. That platform is really where you can start to
Mm.
build in the guardrails, build in the connections out to that external or internal data so that you can build context and provide that across the platform. And with a platform, you can then really scale the AI adoption across your organization. The other thing, just one final bullet there on the internal platform, I think it's really interesting seeing what's happening with AI now. The people that have been software engineers have always been the ones that are the best in the organization to build things. Well, AI is making building things, it truly is democratizing it. You're seeing product managers start to build applications.
Mhm.
You're seeing business analysts, finance and accounting people building applications with AI. Now, the operation, the sysadmin, the SRE of me never wants those applications to go anywhere near production. But maybe what we should be doing is building out those platform guardrails and those platform capabilities so that it can be safe for that business analyst to get something into production, that product manager to ship right off to a customer. So building up the capabilities of that platform, I think, becomes even more important in this world of AI where everyone can be a builder.
Kind of reminds me of the same dynamic of when DevOps was first introduced. There was a point in time where
Yes.
developers weren't allowed anywhere near production, weren't allowed to monitor anything.
Threw
We
them over the
created
wall.
our jar files
Yep.
and burned them to a disk and handed it to
Yeah.
a tech ops team that would then put it into production. And a lot of those same concerns came about. Were like, well, if everybody is in charge of their own infrastructure and monitoring things, there are going to be security issues and nobody's going to know how to do it and everything's going to break. And I think the teams that got it right focused on what you're talking about, like let's have somebody build the capability, make sure that it's reliable, make sure that that anybody can create a Docker container, but we're going to make sure that it's the right Docker
That's right.
container before we put it into production. Um, so what do you think is like what's the Docker
Mm,
container for AI? Like
that's
what's the equivalent there of what system should I build to make it so that I am comfortable with a product owner
Yeah,
putting
I
functionality
think
all the
this
way
is a
into
really
production?
interesting question. I think that, you know, uh, maybe it doesn't change. Like maybe they're building and shipping containers still. That's okay. It because what AI is really doing is changing how they get built and who has the opportunity and the capability to go and build them and introduce that business logic and the application logic and all of that, building all of that in there. So I think that you have some of the same concerns. And I also think that AI can help us with this, right? So if in the past I was focused on building applications, and now I'm focused on building the guardrails and the safety mechanisms and the auditability of these applications as they go through, like that's again a place where AI can help us. I want to do code reviews. That's a place where AI can help us come
Mm,
in and do code reviews. And we can, maybe it's not the final code review, but it's certainly a faster code review. And a first pass is a great place to start. And this is where I think it really comes down to this idea and kind of the core finding of our research in 2025 was that AI acts as an amplifier across your SDLC. And that amplifies both the good and the bad. So high performing teams tend to get higher performing. Teams with a lot of
mm,
friction or bottlenecks tend to feel the pain of those bottlenecks even more acutely. And kind of the canonical example is yes, I can write 10 times as much code in the same amount of time. But if my code review processes haven't scaled, or my feedback mechanisms, whether it's test automation, code reviews, whatever it is, if those feedback mechanisms haven't scaled, I'm now just sending 10 times more things into this already choke point that I have. So I have to be able to scale that as well. Without scaling that, I'm going to feel that pain
mhm,
of delays of getting feedback even more acutely because I'm waiting for more and more things to get through that hurdle.
mhm. Yeah, that's been one of the things I'm banking on with Testry is, ephemeral environments and then being able to run your tests at high levels of
Absolutely.
parallelism in those ephemeral environments. Uh, we've known that was a good development practice for developers, but if you're imagining now anybody's building, or sometimes it's just AI fully building, like, hey, I saw there are some security changes I need to update. I'm going to go ahead and create the pull request. I'm going to go ahead and deploy it. Like, you need to be able to put eyes on it to see, did it actually build what I asked it to build? But you also need to put the automation on it to make sure it didn't introduce any regressions. And we used to merge and have our nightly builds and develop. But the problem with that approach, or even one of the challenges a lot of people struggle with trunk based, if they're not running tests before it goes into trunk, is anybody who starts new
Mhm.
work is starting with a potentially broken build if you didn't already test it. And I think when it comes to AI, like you're talking about this last practice of having a
Mhm.
quality infrastructure for your AI, uh, that's
Absolutely.
got to be
It's
an
it's
important
it's
piece of
so
it, right?
important, and I think, like, as you said, ephemeral environments, great for developers. But now, like, the number of developers, the amount of development that's happening has just grown by an order of magnitude, maybe multiple orders of magnitude. Those ephemeral environments become even more critical,
Mm,
even more important, and that fast feedback becomes even more important. So this is the other thing I think that's really to me exciting is that the capabilities and conditions that DORA has found over the years, fast feedback, a climate for learning, fast flow, those all become even more important in the AI era where you have agents and you have developers pairing
mm.
with agents and you have people that aren't traditional developers building things. All of these capabilities become even more important in order to ensure the success of your team and of your organization.
Cool. So let's say somebody is looking at getting
Yeah.
started with this AI capabilities model. Where should they go next? What's the starting point? Is there an accelerate book
Yeah,
equivalent of the
there
starting
actually is.
point
If you go to
for this model?
Dora.dev, you'll find there's an AI section there. And in December of 2025, we published a report called the AI Capabilities Model Report. And what this does is it goes through each one of those capabilities,
Mhm.
talks about what the capability is, how it impacts and interacts with other capabilities and outcomes that you care about. It gives you ways to assess how you're doing with those capabilities today, and even some guidance around how to start go improving that particular capability, whether it's stronger version control practices, better access to your internal data, a clear and communicated stance. Either way, we give you some guidance that you can start putting into practice today. The other thing that I would highly recommend, and is maybe a little bit of self promotion here, but in addition to Dora.dev, we also have Dora.community. And this is where we have thousands of practitioners and leaders and researchers from around the world that get together regularly on a mailing list and through virtual events to talk about how do we take these ideas and these findings and put them into practice. We're constantly learning from one another and pushing each other to new challenges, new ideas. It's super fun, and we'd love to have you join us.
Mhm. Cool. So I think everybody who's listening right now should definitely check that out if you haven't already. We've been speaking today with Nathen Harvey. Once again, Nathen is the team lead for the DORA team at Google Cloud. And as we can tell, is a clear expert on all things DORA and a lot of really great development practices. So if you're looking to hone your skills, check them out at Dora.dev. Reach out to Nathen or myself, and we can get you in contact with some people who can help you. So thanks for being on Developers Who Test, Nathen.
Awesome, Chris. This was so much fun. Thanks for having me.